Alrighty, guys, how is it going? It's Vidz in the house, and we have a very special treat for you guys today. I am joined by two people, two guests. One is Farhan Qureshi, as you people might know him as well. He's the first person to make a second appearance on the VeeduLive live stream. So congratulations, Farhan. And
Buddy.
also we have with us, yep, there you go. And also we have with us Sham Sharma, who is speaking from the US, and he is the host of the Sham Sharma show on YouTube. So we will be having a very interesting conversation about sort of South Asia, India, Pakistan, Islam, Hinduism, all that lovely history, religions, and also current events as well. So I just would like to Farhan and Sham, thank you so much for coming on.
A pleasure, mate. Thank you very much for having me as well. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So if we could start with Sham, if you could sort of, for those people who may not be familiar with your videos, may not be familiar with the content, how would you describe your channel, and what would you say is the point of your channel, and what kind of videos do you make?
So I hope I can start this with a little bit of a story. So what happened was initially when it comes to particularly Hinduism, it's in a interestingly unique position. So I think in medieval times when Islam sort of came to Hinduism and parts of India were under the heel of Islam for a little bit, Hindus sort of struggled against it, and after that, we dealt with the British for a little while, and especially with the British, it was different from the Islamic invasion. What happened with Islam was very clear in its idea of what it wanted to do with Hinduism. It wanted to end it, and it wanted to end it in a very clear way. With British, it was very different, because what British wanted to do was British wanted to end it in a way where they completely broke the spine of the Indian people, where they completely broke their backs and destroyed all sense of pride or any sense of good feeling that they had towards their culture. The aim of the British was to create a true dominion out of India, in which they were very successful. But what they wanted to do is to create a situation where whenever an Indian looks at something British, they like it way more than something Indian. So that's the idea that was behind it. So in a lot of the British literature or Western literature that concerns Hinduism initially, it was, a lot of that racist stuff that, it was the white man's burden to civilize the savage Hindus. And then in the 60s and the 70s, when sort of academia shifted a little bit and, the more diverse voices started coming in, and the people that were oppressed initially by the sort of racist historians and the scientists got a voice and got a place at the table. But when that happened and when the equation changed, interestingly, Hindus still got left out. They still didn't get a seat at the table. So whether in racist science or whether it comes to, the more progressive science and more progressive history, Hindus never really got a seat at the table. And one of the reasons for that was Hindus are one of the few civilizations, I'd say one of the only civilizations on the planet that were able to survive the sort of Islamic and the sort of Christian onslaught and maintain a majority culture and maintain a majority population and, hold on to their culture. So we're in a very unique position where we're hated by sort of both sides, by the extreme right and by the extreme left. So, and that's been very prevalent in India as well. In political discourse, in historical discourse, Hindus are painted as these evil people who all they did was oppress the minorities, oppress the poor Muslims, and so on and so forth, which is almost the exact opposite of history. So, my interest initially got piqued when I was a kid, and I used to hear these stories in India, and the whole political discourse was very strange for me. So I'd always talk about it with my friends, and I'll always talk about it whenever I was talking to people in my family. And I said, you know what, I talk about it, but my message gets out to 2 or 3 people at one time. So let me try talking about it on camera. Let me try talking about it on YouTube, see if people are interested or not. And if I can get my voice to, or my opinion to even one person, so be it. So that's essentially, how I kind of got around to sharing my story is trying to work against or trying to reclaim the narrative from this warped position that we're in.
That's very interesting. So what has been the reaction what have you found that people are receptive, or people like, what you on about? It was never like
Right.
this, or what's been the reaction?
Well, the reaction has been something. The reaction has been interesting because what I've started to notice in India, particularly, is that there has always been this huge population of Hindus that have always tried to speak out against the current narrative, but they've never had the means to do so, because after India got independence, the ruling government handed the education system of India to mainly communists and people with a leftist lean. So there has been a very strong communist vice grip on Indian education for a very long time. And then similarly on media and any sort of medium that disseminates education or that disseminates information to a large section of people. So for Hindus who wanted to reclaim their narrative, there has literally been no way to be able to do so. But thankfully, since social media, since like 2009, 2010, 2011, so on and so forth, those people who have been trying to reclaim the narrative have finally found a way to do so. Because thanks to social media, there's been a decentralization on the flow of information. So people then, the people that they call alternative media these days, and that has grown in India. And I've mostly found people happy with the way I've been able to present the facts, and in the way I've been able to present the facts, because I try to be usually very careful when I talk about these issues, because there's oftentimes people tend to conflate Islam and Muslims, and I try not to do that, because I think there's a difference between people and the software. So I've usually found people to be, well, at least the people that have watched my stuff, to be happy with what I'm doing. But again, as the channel grows, things might change. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're always, I mean, I found, I mean, with the rise of social media, people, like you were saying, are providing an alternative perspective on many issues, whether it's history or current events or religion or politics or whatever it may be. And if you go against the grain of mainstream media, you will, of course, come against some resistance. But you'll also come against but you'll also be supported by many people as well, because, like, for example, what I do, mainstream media in Britain or whatever would never make fun of Islam the way I do. It will make fun of race, maybe, but not fun of Islam.
Right.
So you'll have people who are for you and against you. But before we go on, Farhan, is there anything you would like to sort of comment on, or maybe add something in with regards to what's already been said?
Yeah, I mean, I seem to right now so far be on the same page as Brother Sham in terms of, the whole inferiority complex that emerges out of, conquering regimes. I think that is a natural process that happens, and it definitely happened, and that has historical and contemporary consequences. So I do agree with what Brother Sham is saying about the Mughal and British invasions and the impact that it had on India, for sure.
And with regards to social media and this sort of reclaiming of identity, I've also seen similar trends within Europe, where I've even seen people return back to Viking or Norse mythology, even going before Christianity. Of course, there are people who are sort of reclaiming Judeo-Christian values, but there are also people who are reclaiming Norse values and Viking values, so on and so forth. Why do you think we're seeing this trend in the world, where people are going, even back before Abrahamic faiths? Sorry, go for it. Yeah.
That's definitely something that I can relate to. I mean, those are just two examples. You have the Kemetic folks, which you've probably come across at Hyde Park, right, Waleed?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I actually heard of them just end of last year when they said, I'm a Kemet. I was like, are you a chemist? Something like that. I was like, I don't understand. There's a lot of black chemists around. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Sorry?
And then what's a Kemet?
Exactly. So Farhan, if you could sort of tell us what a Kemet is.
So these are people who are trying to return to their African ancestry and the African religious traditions, namely the ancient Egyptians and what's been lost. And we're going to touch on some of the reasons why that's happening, but also in your interview with Armin, Waleed, if you recall him talking about many Iranians wanting to return to Zoroastrianism. And also the racial tensions with Arabs that the Persians have. I'm not sure if you saw that last podcast. Did you? Okay. So there's a similar trend there. So here's the thing. We want to be careful because this is partly the alt-right involved. And when you talk about the alt-right, there's bigotry and racism that could certainly surface. And so there's a little bit of a danger in terms of talking about returning to our ancestors, right? I do think that a part of it has to do with the impact that Islam and Christianity has had on the world and the exclusivity factor there, where it's our way or no way, and everybody else goes to hell. And as Christianity and Islam collapses and people are looking for spirituality and identity and these sorts of things, I think what they're doing is they're going back into their ancestry and into their roots. You also have like this ancestry DNA thing going on. I took the test, right? And so a lot of us are connecting back with our roots, given that the past, couple thousand years, the situations that have brought about these exclusive narratives. Now, unfortunately, what happens is, as awesome as it is that we can go back to our roots and find perhaps a sort of universalism, I watched a little bit of your channel, Sham. It has Shri Rajiv Malhotra written all over it. And so this book, Being Different, of how we can be different and yet have mutual respect and coexist.
Yes.
So if we can have pride in our ancestry and where we've come from and what we've been through, and yet have mutual respect and coexist, that's wonderful. But if it leads to tribalism and a type of tribalism that is then bigoted and racist and discriminates against people who are outside of that heritage, now we have problems. And this is where the alt-right dangers come about. And even the Kemetic folks, as much as they say that, it's not about Black superiority, but then you get into that whole melanin argument. I don't know if you've heard of it, and then it starts to gravitate towards where African or dark skin is better. And so now, there's serious dangers in this, and yet there's a energetic or spiritual shift as well that's happening that could be valuable in a very different kind of way. So we're dealing with an interesting phenomenon here, I think, Waleed. And it's like you said, it's not just one culture, one group that's doing it. It's happening across the human spectrum.
Absolutely. So, is there anything you want to say on that, Sham?
Yeah, I think what's very interesting as well is, again, I agree with what Farhan said, and what I think puts Hinduism in a very interesting position in that shift is that, again, it is a culture that has historically shown that acceptance of people, acceptance of other sorts of chains of thought, and acceptance of other sorts of people. It is one of the reasons why Hindus so readily accepted when Iranians, Parsis or Zoroastrians were coming from Iran, escaping persecution to seek shelter in India. And Hindus very readily accepted them. There was no taxes, extra taxes, or any extra restrictions that were put on them that if you need to stay in India, you need to do this and that. And similarly with Tibetans and tons of other groups that have escaped persecution.
Just on that note, wasn't it also that the early Muslims, the family of the Prophet, when they were being persecuted in Arabia, they fled to Sindh and they found refuge within a Hindu king, or was it? I can't remember.
I believe so. I believe so. I'm not 100% sure what the.
That's what I heard. Because the Prophet's family, I think, because they were the bloodline of the Prophet, and they had the so-called right to the throne. So they were being killed because they didn't want them to be kings or queens, whatever it was. So they fled all over the place, and the ones that went to India were given refuge in India. So I just thought.
I've heard that story too. I'm not sure how much archaeological evidence there is or genetic evidence there is for it. It could just be a story, Waleed, or I'd have to look further.
Fair enough. Sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, same here as well. I'll have to kind of look up at that. But again, not to say that there isn't tribalism in Indian society. I'm not trying to say that this is this utopian society that exists with no strife whatsoever. But again, I think generally speaking, in terms of the philosophy and in terms of what the culture suggests to its people, I think that Hinduism, or the Hindu culture in general, not the Hinduism, I don't want to say the religion or something like that, but I think the culture provides a very interesting perspective to that. That it is possible that because Hindus as a people believe in the divinity of all, that supreme consciousness, whatever you'd like to call it, pervades every living being. So there is still a very strong sense of belief among most Hindus in that. And practicing Hindus or even non-practicing Hindus, there's a very strong sense of belief in that. So again, there is that danger, like Farhan said, of going to the other extreme, which is something very important that we should watch towards, because you see that in particularly in Western cultures, you see that a little bit as well, where you see some Mexicans or other people of color. Farhan was talking about some people in the black population that say that now being white is actually bad, and you have black is better now, which is, again, I think it's a very stupid argument and something that I think we should all speak out against as well. But then again, yeah, basically that's what I'm saying, that I think Hinduism provides a very unique perspective in the shift that is happening today.
And I just want to sort of touch upon that. I have found this to be, I found myself to be in a difficult position, because on one side, I'm a libertarian, I'm all for the individual, I don't care what race, what color, whatever you are, as long as you respect individual rights, I'm cool with you. But on the flip side, where we have in Europe anyway, by some of the sort of more extreme left, saying all cultures are equal, in the sense all their values are equal. So now you're going to put the Enlightenment values of Europe with things that are going on in parts of the world where there's a lot of violence and whatever it is. And I found that's not true. So the opposite reaction to that has been, now I'm proud of my culture. And there's nothing wrong with being proud. How does one balance pride in the values that their culture has without you see what I'm saying? Without denigrating the other human being that's not part of their culture, if that makes sense. I found myself in a very tricky position, because obviously I believe in British values, but I'm of Pakistani origin. So how does that work, if that makes sense?
I think Farhan touched on that really well when he said that you can take pride in culture, but at the same time have mutual respect. And I think that aspect of mutual respect is very important. I'll let, of course, Farhan speak on that a little bit. But some people talk about tolerance, or it is only we all we need to do is tolerate other people. But I don't think just tolerance is enough, because tolerance is not a, I don't think it's a complete word. I think mutual respect is a better phrase to use when it says, and I think that is something that we're taught in India. Like before, you'd see, one of the things that you'd see in India is you'd find overseas, when Indians go overseas, you'd find very few, if at all, like Indian gangs that are just roaming the streets. You'll see, this is something that I was talking about in a previous video, that you'll see Chinese gangs, you'll see Chinese mobs, Russian mobsters, this mobsters, that mobsters, different sorts of gangs. But it's very, very rare to see sort of Indian gangs and see Indians that are not assimilating well in foreign cultures when they move to foreign cultures. And I think a large part of that is because our parents teach us, or our culture in a way also teaches us, mutual respect. It says respect the culture that you go to, show them the respect that they deserve. Just because you take pride in your culture doesn't mean their culture is bad or evil, or that you can't be friends with them or anything of that sort, which is why I think, at least in part, why I think that Indians, by and large, assimilate really well in foreign societies. And I'll let Farhan take the rest of it.
That was actually pretty awesome. But we'll leave that. That's a good question. And the thing, it really boils back down to being able to coexist with those that are different. The thing is, Waleed, this idea of postmodernity, where everybody transcends identity, it's very idealistic, and yet it's not as realistic as what we have on the ground, which is differences amongst us. And so I think true unity or harmony happens with an embrace of diversity, meaning that people are a Pakistani person can totally celebrate their culture, an Indian person can totally celebrate their culture, an African person can totally celebrate their culture. So for example, when you see The Rock, the wrestler, so when he's doing his tribal dances, which he does, right, And in the WWE, you have all the Samoan wrestlers, right?
Right.
And they all celebrate their heritage and their dances and the tattoos and everything. And no one objects to that celebration, right? Because it's not infringing upon anybody else's culture or tradition, and it's perfectly thought of as normal. And I think that if we can have that spirit where a person can wear a bindi or a sari and not be thought as, oh, you're not assimilating, right? That there's ways to ideologically assimilate and yet still, carry yourself and your energy and your culture in a meaningful and respectful way. And I think that is completely possible. And I think that is what in Western cultures, being different is something that we have to embrace. That's a part of that multiculturalism that we're hoping for. And of course, multiculturalism is limited, as you said, Waleed, because there are certain values, certain beliefs that are not compatible with Western values. So for example, if you dress a certain way or act a certain way, or if you have certain behaviors that you might do in your particular country that won't fly because of the values in this country, then there's going to be conflict. And there's a way to understand, I think you said it, Waleed, in your interview with Armin, that when you're going to another country, you have to understand where you're going and what values that they have and sort of assimilate to that. But that does not entail a complete abandonment of Eastern values or Eastern culture, or if you're coming from Mexico, Mexican culture, and so on and so forth. A person who's wearing a sombrero in America should not be discriminated against because he's not, quote unquote, assimilating perfectly the way that you would like him to. And so I think that there's a balance where we can have this diversity and respect that diversity, and yet there still needs to be an ideological assimilation.
I agree. And I want to get into questions from the comment section in about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, but I just want to put something out there for you guys. I think when you were saying that Indians, by and large, integrate better in countries outside of India, I was speaking to my friend in the UK early, like I think it was last year. He was on a live stream with me, and he's doing a PhD in ethnic minorities within the UK with a specialization in South Asian people, so Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis. And he was saying that the most integrated and sort of financially better off people in the UK are of Sikh than Hindu people. And that has something to do with the fact that they came via East Africa. So they were sort of the more business sort of people, and the Pakistanis and Bengalis that came were sort of workers. But I was listening to a conversation in Speaker's Corner, and they were saying that, they're saying that integration is great, but that doesn't mean you have to rid yourself of your previous culture. And they were saying that the Sikh people have been probably the most successful in integrating without getting rid of the turban, without getting rid of the beard. They're still Sikh, they have Sikh names, yet they're doing very well in the military, finance, or, in the city, and they're doing pretty well. So we actually kind of have a model here already saying you can be Sikh, you can be Punjabi and all the rest of it, and you can still live a normal life within the country. And I feel like they don't have the same problem maybe as many Muslims do, especially up north. The Muslims in London are much better, that I found, than the Muslims up north, and that may be because the north of England is much more deprived in general than the south. So even the English people up north are much more deprived than the English people down south. So maybe that's a north-south divide that only exacerbates already existing problems. It's a very multifaceted problem, which is well above my pay grade. So this is just armchair sort of, opinions, whatever it is. But one question I want to ask you guys, and then we can get into the questions. Then we can get into the comment section. So be patient, guys. We've got so many questions are coming for you guys. So they're sort of bursting at the seams. Someone just said the North shits on the South. I think you would find that you're wrong. So don't even start. Don't even start. Okay. So my question to you guys: is there any difference? From your perspective, you guys are both Eastern and Western, like myself, but especially with regards to Indian culture and Hinduism, you're Eastern and Western. Is there actually a difference between what one would say Western values and Eastern values, or are they the same but just using different historical language, and maybe they got there differently, but they're the same, or are they genuinely different? And Sham,
I'll let Farhan go first. I went first the previous time.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the differences that might come about is individualism versus collectivism. Not to say that Hinduism in India doesn't have a degree of individualism, but in the West we absolutely glorify the individual. Think for yourself, be yourself, express yourself, do what you want to do. You don't have to agree with your parents. You don't have to agree with your community. You could just completely and totally be yourself. Critical thinking, free thinking, that sort of thing, the Enlightenment values, right? Those are things that we absolutely glorify in the West, which I absolutely enjoy and I'm absolutely for. I think where we lose out, and it shows in our politics and in our culture, is that there's much less or to degree of collectivism, where there is a unity, where we are a country, where we can unite under a flag and certain values and principles in any given country. So I feel that there is a little bit more of an emphasis in the East towards collectivism than there is in the West. And now, don't get me wrong, I think that there's detriments to individualism and there's detriments to collectivism, because then if everybody just gets brainwashed and acts like the same way, then that's no good either. But yes, there has to be a sense of unity with your fellow neighbors. And so, I mean, I would probably see that as a distinction between East and West. And of course, this occurs in Japan and in China and many other countries as well. And they've done studies on this specifically on how collectivist cultures react. I could get into those studies, but it's not important.
And I'd agree with Farhan as well, because I think he's very correct in that the West sort of does favor individualism a lot more to sort of collectivism, and the East tends to favor collectivism as well. Again, I think Hinduism is an interesting perspective on that whole thing as well. Whereas you'll find in the Vedanta where they talk about how Hinduism is a process of self-discovery. It's about discovering the divinity within yourself. And Swami Vivekananda, who was a great sort of Hindu philosopher of the 19th century, he used to write as well that you need to work to find the answers yourself. You need to focus on finding the answers for yourself. If somebody tells you that they know all the answers, run away from him. And that's something that he wrote. That's something that I really admire about what he wrote and about sort of what Hindu philosophy says as well. But at the same time, before the British came, they used to write accounts of Indian villages, and they used to write accounts of how every Indian village was a sort of self-sufficient, tight-knit unit. So the village was self-sufficient by itself, but within the village there was a very strong sense of community. So I'd say in India, from my experience, which is my only experience of Eastern culture. So for India, I'd say that there was a mix between sort of collectivism, individuality, with a fairly strong sense of community.
Fair enough. So guys, we've been too nice to each other. We've been agreeing too much. So let's get it. So now that we're all friends, we've got a question here saying, do you or your guests think that the relationship between India and Pakistan can ever be repaired to the point where both nations are at peace? So I'll let you guys hash it out, and I'll just sit here and watch the fireworks. I'm joking. Sham, do you want to go first?
Sure. I 100% think so, because we're the same people. We're the same heritage. We're culturally also, even though I think I don't think the Pakistani people culturally are very different from the Indian people. I think culturally we're very similar. I think it's the governments and the army, and you can say those things that what is being taught to Pakistanis might take them away from what our common culture is, might be taking them away from what our common culture is. But I still think that no matter, even if there has been a few decades of indoctrination, both on the Indian side and both on the Pakistani side. I think there's a little bit of indoctrination on the Indian side as well, where I think when I was growing up, when I was a kid, we'd talk amongst friends, and whenever we talk about Pakistanis, it was all bad. And what we'd do is what I'm guilty of doing myself when I was younger, when I was a kid, that I would conflate the country Pakistan and the government of Pakistan and the army of Pakistan with the people of Pakistan. And I think there's a big difference between the two. And so I 100% believe that there is peace in the future between India and Pakistan. Now, a lot of people in India tend to have this ideology of Akhand Bharat, and that Akhand Bharat essentially means that the whole India needs to become all India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they all need to become one country again. I don't think that necessarily needs to be the case. I just think that in the future, I do see the hold of, well, I hope, and I think that'll happen. What I see is the hold of, I think, sort of radical Islamic philosophy loosening on the people across the subcontinent. And once that happens, I think people will start realizing that the people across the border are not bad people, and that the people across the border, both sides, are going to start realizing that there's a lot of cultural similarities here. So rather than trying to be, and this is something that Waleed and I were talking about right before we went online, live, that rather than trying to be Arabs and rather than trying to name our children Muhammad bin Qasim, we'd realize that we have so much more in common with the Indians than the Arabs. And once that realization starts to happen, I think things will start moving forward at a very quick pace.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to agree a little bit with that in the sense that, okay, so I'm a little bit more optimistic in the sense that I don't think Islam is going to survive. I just don't think ideologically it can. I mean, I don't see that possibility in the future. And if Islam truly collapses in the minds of people, then that leaves the differences between Pakistan and India to be much less in principle. And so I think that the decline of Islam in the world in general, but also in the Middle East and in Pakistan, in Iran, as Islam begins to leave the minds of people, there's going to be more unity amongst people in general, and we might be able to see the Akhand Bharat or other forms of unity as well. The European Union will be much more solidified. I know you guys just went through Brexit and whatnot, but I see a future of more that is more unity based than one that is divided. And I think that the primary thing within the realm of Islam, within the realm of Pakistan, is their identity with Islam, and I think that's going to begin to dissipate in the minds of people. So does that mean that we're now moving in towards either a ethno-nationalism of India, or does it necessarily mean that everybody's going to be Hindu by faith? I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think atheism is on the rise. I think agnosticism is on the rise. I think that spirituality is on the rise, and I think that the spirituality that's on the rise is very much rooted in Hindu practices like meditation and yoga, because they work. They legit work, and so I see the world gravitating more towards that picture, with atheism, agnosticism, and the spirituality that's rooted in Eastern mysticism. And so I don't think that Pakistan and Islam have that much of a future.
Wow, that's you said optimistic.
I don't know.
That's a pretty radical picture. No, I'm not having a go, because I honestly I can't fathom Pakistan without Islam, because every time I go back, it doesn't get less Islamic. Well, it depends where you go. If you go to like a city like Karachi, it's very modern. You like any Westerner can go there and speak English, and just it's like, you know, it's not a big deal. But there are parts where things are getting more Islamic, or more Islam is more sort of interwoven within the culture of Pakistan. So when you say that it's going to dissipate, I honestly, maybe I haven't seen what you've seen, but I just can't see that.
Well, yeah, let's talk about it, because we're dealing with a generational situation as well, right? So you have the silent generation and then the baby boomer generation, and we see where traditionalism has gone between between the baby boomers and the silent generation. The silent generation was absolutely traditional. The baby boomer the baby boomers are still traditional, but they're much more open-minded than the silent generation was. And then with the millennials, you see a completely different for this whole postmodern framework of thinking emerging amongst the millennial generation. And so, but that postmodern framework doesn't necessarily abandon tradition either, right? So it's kind of like a combination of traditionalism, postmodernism, and modernism, a mixing of all three of those perspectives. And so as that happens, what we should see in future generations, meaning when the baby boomers die, let's be real, our parents are going to die, millennials are going to take over, and we're going to raise our kids in a very different world, and those kids are going to raise other kids in a very different world. And so do I think that Islam, and particularly exclusivity-based doctrines and ideas that are not rooted in science and logic and personal experience, do I think that they're going to survive? Absolutely not. How do you possibly imagine that Islam could survive in the minds of future generations? I don't see it. What you're looking at right now is a contemporary version of the world that is dominated by baby boomers, and Generation Xers and millennials are just coming up. And that transition is going to happen overnight. When I mean when the baby boomers pass away and the millennials take over, it's going to be a different world. But that does not mean the end of conservatism and the rise of liberalism. What's going to happen amongst millennials is, as we grow older, our liberalism is going to we're going to become more conservative, is what I'm saying, as we grow older, which is a natural phenomenon for a lot of people, is that, you know, you're much more liberal when you're younger, and as you grow older and you're raising the next generation, you begin to value the conservatism for the next generation that's going to keep them in order rather than chaos, because liberalism could absolutely lead to anarchy and chaos if you go far left. And so that's kind of, I do not under any circumstances see a far right traditionalism within the minds of the future generations. That's if you look at generational trends, you do the research on in terms of Pew and Gallup, how millennials think very differently. And I think Sham, where you and I and others come in, is that there is a value for our past, because we couldn't be here without past generations surviving, without them handing down certain tools for us to be here. And it's almost like telling somebody to go figure out biology without Darwin, without the contemporary research, just from scratch, go do biology. Right. We depend on all the past generations who have given us the knowledge and the perspective, and they've lived and died and survived to get all of this knowledge and information to us. And so there's going to be a value for tradition. There's going to be a value for history. I think the future generations will worship history and will worship our generation as well, because of all of the things that we've accomplished and struggled through. And so I think that traditionalism isn't going to go away. It's going to evolve into something different for the future generations. So I do not see Islam surviving in that context.
Fair enough.
I think to answer sort of Waleed as well on when he said that he just cannot picture, you know, Pakistan without Islam. I think it's a good point. But politically also, if you look at it, you know, it's interesting stuff, because Pakistan sort of ever since its creation, Pakistan's obviously had a chip on its shoulder, because, you know, it separated, you know, Muslims voted overwhelmingly to separate from India because we don't want to coexist with these kafirs and we want to have our own country. And now you have your own country, and, you know, there's these problems within this country, and, you know, things haven't really, you've seen the person that you separated from grow bigger and more prosperous, and you see the people thrive, the economy there thrive, and it's not the exact same case with you who are supposed to be better than the people that you separate from. So I think there's an aspect of that as well. There's an aspect of a chip on your shoulder that that makes you become more sort of conservative and dig in your heels a little bit more than other cultures would. I think there's an aspect of that. Again, a chip on your shoulder can only take you so far, but there's an aspect. I think people are going to start, like you said, again, I completely agree with Farhan, because people are going to start realizing what some of the decisions that the government has made, particularly when it comes to its relationship with China. If you just look at it politically, some of the decisions that the government has made, the future generations are going to bear the consequences and suffer for it. And so when those consequences start kicking in, like, people are saying that Pakistan is on its way to becoming a Chinese economic colony by 2030 or something like that. Now, I don't know how much truth there is to it, but there is a kernel of truth in there. So when, like I said, the millennial generation goes to that place, and when they start raising children and those people start suffering the consequences of this religious dogma and of this strange political decisions just to get back at your mortal enemy India, so to say, when you start suffering those consequences, people are going to realize, look, we're being taken for a ride here, and we're fighting. Essentially, we're fighting our own people. We have this mortal hatred of our own people, and this has to stop. So I think politically there are signs as well.
Fair enough. There are literally so many questions. I'm trying to target them equally. So someone is saying, will the Hindu caste system ever disappear? It seems like the people who are of a higher caste will try to maintain it due to power reasons, and the lower caste ones are trying to abolish it. And I'll just throw in one more question, and then I'll let you guys respond. What are your views on Modi? Is he extreme? And I'll let you guys take that in whichever order you want to take it.
So let me start with the caste stuff first. So caste is a problem. Caste is a real problem, and it's a serious problem in a lot of areas. So I have seen people. I've seen, Hindu sort of patriots suggest that this is not an issue, and this is an issue that is long gone, and that is not true. Caste is an issue. Caste is a real issue. Caste-based discrimination, particularly in the state that I belong to. I belong to a state called Bihar in eastern India. There, the problem is more acute than other states. So it is a problem. Has there progress been made over the past few decades? Most certainly. And again, people need to remember that caste-based rigidity of the caste system is not a Hindu concept. Rigidity of the caste system is something that people have created. This is not a Hindu concept in and of itself. So it's a problem. It's a serious problem. It is a problem on which movement has been made, and it's a situation that's gotten better, partly due to social changes, partly due to affirmative action plans by the government. So there's been movement on that. There's still work to do. I don't think we need to abolish caste I think we just need to start moving back to whatever the original status for the caste or the Varna system as it was already initially known. I think that was a better classification for it, is that if you are somebody, you're just classified into different groups based on what you do. In a very rudimentary way, that's what it kind of signifies. And I think that's a better way to look at it. So I think it'll definitely get better, and I think there's definitely work to do there. When it comes to Modi, I don't think Modi's an extremist. I think if I can think of one global leader in the past, I don't know how many decades, that has been the subject of just an insane amount of propaganda, I think it's Modi. And look, I like Modi, but I'm not a BJP fanboy, which is the party that he belongs to. I think there's problems with the BJP. I think the BJP is an opportunistic party, just like the Congress party. It's just the BJP talks about Hindu issues and says that it cares about Hindu issues. And because Hindus are so bloody starved for options today, politically, that they tend to go with the BJP just because the BJP tends to say the word Hindu.
Sorry,
sure.
Could you compare Modi to Trump in the sense that people who support Trump know his flaws, but he's just like the only option other than everyone else? Is that what you're kind of saying?
No, I don't think Modi and Trump can be compared at all. I think they can be compared in terms of the amount of hate towards them by mainstream media. I think that's where the comparison ends, in my opinion. I think that's where the comparison ends, because I don't think he is an extremist. I don't think he is the things that Trump is said to be. I think he always talks in a very measured manner. You will not see him go off on rants. You will not see him say, "Oh, this journalist said something about me. Well, that journalist is an idiot, or he's a fat bastard, or whatever." He won't say anything like that.
How's his Twitter feed?
Well, exactly, like, check out his Twitter feed. His Twitter feed is like poles apart from that dude. Like, not nearly as entertaining as Trump's Twitter feed. Like, I actually like going to Trump's Twitter feed and reading stuff. I don't like to go to Narendra Modi's Twitter feed and reading stuff, because there's none of that stuff there. So I think there's definitely massive differences. I think what people dislike really a lot about Modi is the fact that he is an unabashed nationalist, and he's somebody who's very proud of being a Hindu, and he's very proud to say it. That's something that usually politicians have run away from in India. So he's very proud to say it, and that's why people are drawn to him. And also, he also doesn't really kowtow to the secular things that politicians are supposed to do. So politicians are supposed to wear the skull cap and hang out with pastors all the time and stuff like that. And he doesn't believe in doing so. He said, I don't have to wear a skull cap to ensure that Muslims are taken care of in India. So I think he upsets the whole secular balance of the force there. So that's why I think there's a lot of hatred towards him.
Farhan, if you could go on Modi and Caste in whichever order you want to.
Sure. Obviously, the first thing that I have to say is that my opinion really doesn't matter here, because I'm an American-born American citizen, right? So without being in India and seeing the situations there and how people feel, my opinion really doesn't matter. So I'm an outsider having some of the same questions that you do, Veedu. I'll start with the caste system again, without having experienced. I don't know the difference, what it's like to be a South Indian versus a North Indian. All I know is how to be, an American-born person with brown skin. So there's very little that I can say. What I can say is that philosophically, the Varna system is a reality, whether we like it or not. There are people who are in different situations, different types of intelligences. This does not mean that anybody is inferior or superior. Where a person is lacking, they have talents and gifts and blessings where the others do not. And so I think that there is a sort of a balance there. But in terms of the reality that we see within the human condition, there's different people, just like we discussed in our last conversation, Veedu. You're not going to put Richard Dawkins onto the battlefield. You're going to put him into the classroom to learn biology or whatever he wants to learn, whatever he's interested in, simply because that's his nature. That's not saying that he can't become a military person if he wants to.
Well, he wouldn't beat the survival of the fittest if he were to on the battle.
So I think when it comes to that, the basic idea of Varna is that this is the human condition, and you have to deal with this reality, is that there's different types of human beings with different temperaments and different body types and psychologies. So there's that end of it. But then what humanity ends up doing, as humanity has always done in every situation, and I'm careful to generalize, but we have to generalize the human condition, because we are what we are and we're susceptible to what we're susceptible to, is that we find racism and bigotry and discrimination in all countries between races and languages and groups, identity groups, throughout human civilizations. And while we can generalize the human condition in that way, we also have to be very specific and condemn specific cases of bigotry, racism, and whatnot as well. And so when it happens, for example, in India, then I think that the right thing to do is to condemn it, and that there should be no difference in terms of the respect and dignity and worth and treatment of all human beings. Nobody disagrees with that. What ends up happening is that when you do have people in lower socioeconomic situations, their opportunities are less, their comprehension based on the education that they've received might be less. And so naturally what you're going to have is you're going to have people who don't have opportunities and are oppressed as a result of the situations that they're in. It's not that they can't get out of it, and it's not that we can't help them get out of it, which we should. It's just that's what the situation is, and that's minorities in America, minorities in Britain, and minorities in India. Now, granted, India has over 1 billion population, bro, right? That's a massive population. We only have 300 million in the United States of America. And so the percentages, statistically speaking, in terms of what you're going to get in India, are far greater than what you would in the United States or other parts of the world. And we can be idealistic and say that we're going to end poverty and racism and bigotry, but it's not humanly possible at this time. Do I think that the future looks different in that the versions of the caste system that we're talking about that differentiate different groups and different cultures and languages and Dalits and South India versus North India and all that kind of stuff? Do I think that that's going to begin to end? Absolutely. People are going to have to marry each other. People are going to have kids with each other of these different.
They already are.
Right, they already are. And then as that continues to happen, then the type of racism that we see will begin to diminish. Again, this isn't talking about tomorrow or 20 years from now. We're talking about 100, 200, 300 years from now as we slowly evolve. And I always say that evolution is a slow process. It's taken us 14 billion years to get here. It took us, centuries and decades for us to even be human. To evolve from ape-like creatures. And so so social evolution and practical evolution is just as slow. It's frustrating, but yes, I think that the discriminatory type of caste system must be eliminated. And I think that India has that intention. I know that that type of caste system was banned in India 10 years before segregation was in the United States. And it's simply an ongoing process that we have to continue to fight. Now, one thing that I do want to say with regards to social justice warriors is that I'm for social justice warriors in the sense that people need to scream and shout when there is discrimination. Because if no one screams and shouts, then no one's going to pay attention and nothing is going to be done about it. And so, yes, if there's discrimination in India, then that needs to be, then social justice warriors need to scream and shout. The one other thing that I want to say is that from what I've seen without being in India is people who live in the parts of India that are doing well, they don't even know about that type of a caste system or discrimination. They're oblivious of it and they have to travel to those parts where there is discrimination to discover it. And so there's that phenomenon that I've witnessed as well. So that's that whole caste situation. All right, now let's get into Narendra Modi. So here's the thing, in the United States of America, you talk about Trump, right? So when the Republicans and Democrats were going against each other, I looked at one particular candidate, John Kasich. I don't know if you guys have heard of him.
Yep.
And I was like, what an awesome Republican candidate, right? If he was our president, I would be proud to call John Kasich the president of the United States. Conservative values, both in terms of social values and in terms of economic values. Conservative, somebody that can represent the country, and that president would, granted, represent the entire conservative Republican caucus, not just himself. And so similarly in India, Narendra Modi represents 80% of the country's population. That is 80% is a massive amount of people that he represents, and that's a good thing. I definitely don't think Narendra Modi is anything compared to Donald Trump in terms of behavior, in terms of radicalism, in terms of the way he's very diplomatic in his words. When he comes out, he says the right things, if you will, when atrocities happen. I mean, the liberal media might complain about how long it takes for him to get to say something, but I go back to Obama's statement. As somebody who loves President Obama, he was in a similar situation. Well, he's like, I like to know what I'm talking about before I talk about it. I like the facts to come out before jumping the gun. And so and Narendra Modi, I mean, his character, he's a beautiful person. Like Noor in Islam, we say Noor meaning light, right? It shines from his face. But granted, that's not a good argument, right? That's not a logical. But subjectively, I do have that. We're humans, right? So I like President Obama as a person. Besides the policies, besides the politics, I love Obama as a person. And I have that same sentiment towards Narendra Modi. I really think that he's good for the country. And I really think that because in the BJP and those who are far right and fascist in India, he's a voice that actually helps calm them down. He's that moderate when you actually study some of his stuff. And so no, I think that Narendra Modi is great for India. He's great for the 80% of the population that he represents, and it's very. I mean, I think that we also should always criticize all of our politicians and everything that's going on. But I think that he calms those elements of the BJP down that need to be calmed down, and that's a good thing.
Fair enough. The only comparison I made with Trump, not in terms of tweets or what he says in his media thing, in the sense, I haven't met someone yet who isn't either I hate Trump or I love Trump, or I hate Modi or I love Modi. I haven't met someone who's like, Modi, yeah, he's all right, it's not bad. Or Trump, yeah, he's all right, he's bad. No, he's not. Like, for me, when I speak to people, it's like, Modi, he's terrible. Or if I speak to some of my friends, Indian friends, yeah, man, Modi's the best, Modi's the best. I haven't met someone who's like, yeah, he's all right, he's not amazing, but whatever. Like, but that's what I meant by Trump and Modi.
Right.
Like, they're very divisive in that sense. You either love them or hate them.
I think what happened with Modi as well is similar, like in the way that something that happened to Trump is, again, like I said, that's where the similarities between those two end, is the treatment of him from certain media organizations and certain people. So in 2002 in India, there were these riots that happened in a state named called Gujarat, and Gujarat was the place where Narendra Modi was the chief minister or governor of, for example. So he was sort of presiding over the state, and these riots happened, and then the next day after the riots, every single media organization and every single prominent journalist, every single prominent intellectual in India started calling him a mass murderer. Like, he was the one that told people to go start butchering Muslims. By the way, a lot of Hindus died in those riots as well. So that's something that's happened, and there was a bunch of inquiries that were put on Modi by the opposite government, by the other government. And all of those inquiries found absolutely no involvement of Modi. So he was exonerated by all of those inquiries that were put against him as well. But those charges of he's a mass murderer, he's a monster, that stuff never went away, which is also interesting because if you look at India and if you look at various states across India, it is the Congress party that has ruled India for most of India's freedom. And there are thousands of riots, that have happened across India as well. And you will not see people or these media organizations or these intellectuals call all the leaders of the Congress party as mass murderers or killers or baby killers and all of that stuff, So it's that dichotomy of treatment that he gets as opposed to that all other leaders tend to get, that even people who are like, I like Modi, when you talk to them, they'll be like, I like Modi. But then you see that the other side is treating Modi, is calling them a monster, a baby killer, a war criminal, all of that stuff. So the people who are just trying to support Modi, they have to be like, no, look, this is how it is. This is what he's done. He's not as bad and this and that. So their defense has to be more, or tends to be more spirited than if he was somebody that was not being mistreated by the media so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in politics, one thing that we have to pay attention to is how a politician has to do justice to the contingency or the constituency that he appeals to, or she appeals to in any given nation. They have a constituency that they have to speak to, and it's very tough when you have these bipartisan issues. I do think that a stronger politician will always stand up for the highest values rather than merely their immediate constituency, but it's very tough to do for anybody, liberal, conservative, or what have you. And I think that's a very tough situation. I appreciate Narendra Modi and what he's done and what he's tried to do. I know that it's very difficult. I think that there's personally, I've as a liberal or on the left, I don't know if I would say progressive, whatever you want to say, center left. I mean, I think that there's a lot to be valued in terms of certain figures in the Congress, not all of them. I appreciate Manmohan Singh. He seemed like a person who had noble ideas and noble values. Nehru had a lot of good ideas, but the thing is, he tried to be too Western, and he neglected the people of India by trying to force India to be more Western than it could be. And so I think that there's a lot of value in the Congress in India. I think there's value there to consider with Narendra Modi. But you know, who am I? I'm over here in the United States watching, just like you are.
Lovely. So we've got a question here asking about the. Oh, I just lost the question. It was about the Aryan invasion theory.
Right.
What do you guys make of that? And also, I'll just throw in another question: is why do Hindus want Kashmir to be part of India while not treating Kashmiri Muslims as their brethren? Why are Kashmiri Muslims labeled as terrorists / stone pelters? So a non-controversial question, as always.
I like those.
So I'll let you guys decide. Do you want to go for the Aryan invasion theory or the Kashmiri question first?
I'll let you go, Sham. Go for it.
Okay, let's tackle the Kashmir one, because the Aryan invasion theory is usually a very long answer. I'll have to give you a better researched answer than I would be able to give you right now, but I can try and answer that one too. But let's go with the Kashmir one first. So the reason I think why Indians want Kashmir to be part of India is because Kashmir's always been part of India. India is Kashmir, and Kashmir is India. And so just like if you look at Pakistan was forcibly created to be a separate entity, but Pakistan is India. It's where Hindus, great works were written. It was in that large northwestern area where the Vedas were written, where the river Saraswati was, and Saraswati, which is a river that is very greatly revered by many Hindus. It flowed through Pakistan as well, and the University of Takshashila is in Pakistan, where Kautilya went and taught. So our history is inextricably tied with Pakistan. There, as much as people like to pretend that Pakistan was a new entity that just dropped on the face of the planet in the 15th century, that's not the case. And that's the same thing with Kashmir. Kashmir was a great seat of Sanskrit learning, was a great seat of Sanskrit, Kashmir was a great seat of Shaivism and Shaivite scholars. So Kashmir has provided, or the people of Kashmir and the scholars of Kashmir have provided so much great work in terms of Hindu philosophy, in terms of Hindu literature, in terms of Sanskrit philosophy and literature, and so on and so forth. So it's been part of India since Hinduism came to be, or since Hindus came to be on this planet, and so on and so forth. And that's why people want it to be part of India. Now, coming to Kashmiri Muslims, and why don't people consider Kashmiri Muslims part of India? I don't know if, I honestly don't know if that's the case. I don't know if there's people walking around saying like Kashmiri Muslims are not Indian, but Bihari Muslims are Indian, or Muslims from UP are Indian. I don't think anybody's saying that. Nobody's saying that Punjabi Muslims are Indian, but Kashmiri Muslims are not Indian. It doesn't make sense that the same people who are clamoring and fighting so hard to make sure that Kashmir remains part of India are saying that, but the Kashmiris are not part of India. I mean, that argument doesn't really add up that much. In fact, the Indian government has been trying to make sure that Kashmiris feel integrated within the Indian mainstream, because the Indian government spends a disproportionate amount of money on Kashmir as opposed to other states. Kashmir is 1% of India's population, but it receives 10% of central grants, as opposed to Uttar Pradesh, which is, I don't know, somewhere around 15% of the country's population, but it only receives like 3% of central grants. So, and the army is constantly building schools. They're trying to help young Kashmiri students come and study. They're spending a lot of money and infrastructure in Kashmir to ensure that people of Kashmir are taken care of. Kashmir already, according to the Indian Constitution, according to Article 370, has special rights that allows them to do things that nobody else in the country can do. So they're already treated as a special people. And then to make the accusation that they're not considered as part of India is frankly a pretty absurd accusation to make. I think no Indian says that Kashmir isn't part of India, or Kashmiris are not part of India. There is a small contingent of hardcore right-wingers that say, oh, well, then they can just go to Pakistan. And their lives are not going to be any better in Pakistan. Let me just say that very frankly. They're not. Their lives, I truly believe that the Indian government values them and India values them, and their lives will be better here.
Farhan, if you could
okay.
Go for it.
So I guess what I'll do is I'll go on Kashmir, and then I'll let Sham go on the Aryan invasion, and then I'll touch on the Aryan invasion. With Kashmir, one of the things that that comes to mind is when Barack Obama won the presidency, how Texas, people were talking about Texas becoming gaining its own independence because they didn't want to deal with the Democratic liberal president. And then when Trump got in, everybody was like, let's go to California, let's fly over Bernie Sanders, and we're going to elect our president. Right? And I mean, I don't agree with that in either direction. I don't think that when you lose and you're on the losing team that we have to now separate and create some type of utopia in one particular area. So I'm definitely not for separatism. I was hoping that the Brexit thing wouldn't pass simply because the disunity that it causes, and what it demonstrates is that we can't get along, that we refuse to get along, that we refuse to live together. And I feel that's the same thing with Kashmir. Is in principle. Here's the thing: I don't know what it's like to live in India as a Hindu Pandit, in Kashmir as a Hindu Pandit. I don't know what it's like to be a Kashmiri living in broader India. So I can't speak to that. But what I do know that is, in principle, people should be able to get along. And if they can't get along, what is it that is causing you to want to divide? You know what I mean? Is it ideological? Is it Islam? Is it some type of a persecution that's happening? So I can't speak to that because I haven't experienced it. But in principle, I am not for separatism. I'm for unity, and figuring out the way to have unity. But again, I'm not there. So that's as much as I'll say about Kashmir, and I'll let Sham touch on the Aryan invasion, and then I'll touch on it.
Okay, so I'm guessing and hoping also a little bit that Farhan is better versed in the Aryan invasion theory than I am. I mean, I've read up a little bit about it, of course. The interesting thing that they say is that these marauders on their horses came down from Central Asia one day, and then within a span of a century, they wrote the Vedas. They established a flourishing Indus Valley civilization based on scientific discovery and trade and stuff like that. And remember again that these are horseback marauders like the Mongols that just came down and established this highly sophisticated civilization within a couple of centuries. So that has never sat right with me, number one. Secondly, also they always say that the Vedas were written in around 1500 AD, which has already now been proved to be not the case. They've been proved to be older, but they say that the Indus Valley civilization was not really a Hindu civilization. It was a Dravidian civilization. So Dravidians are the so-called original inhabitants of India that were driven down to the south by the Aryan invaders. So Indus Valley civilization was a Dravidian civilization, and then the Aryans came down, pushed butchered the Dravidians, and then pushed them down into the south, and then established Hinduism, so to say. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the things that have been found in the Indus Valley civilization, you look at the seal where Shiva is seated, the seal of the yogi, it is called, and you look at the seal of the mother goddess, and you look at the seal of the snakes that they call it. All of these things that have been found all across the Indus Valley civilization that very clearly point to, when you look at Shiva's the yogi sitting, it is Shiva, it is the river coming out, it is the horns and all of that stuff. You look at the mother goddess, and it is one of the most important sort of concepts of Hinduism. So there are so many discoveries that have already been made. There was one recently, I think it was a couple of days ago, that researchers found a 2,000 or 3,000 year old chariot in northern India somewhere, and people said that the chariot was sort of invented when the Aryans moved in around 1500 BC. So again, that theory goes sort of out of the window as well. So there's so many things to sort of point in the direction that the Aryans didn't really migrate from anywhere, or the civilization did not come from migratory people. The civilization came from India, from within India, because all the places and all the things that the Vedas and everything talks about all those places are in India. It never talks about mountains in Central Asia or rivers in Central Asia or anything related to Central Asia. There's absolutely no mention of that. When the British came to India, they couldn't stop talking about how awesome Europe was. And when the Muslims came to India, they always talked about Mecca and Medina and so on and so forth. But it's weird that those cultures, when they came to India, just completely forgot about their ancestral homeland and never once mentioned it. That's a very absurd idea. So again, there's ample proof to suggest that the whole Aryan invasion theory is a bogus, and it was essentially created by Western culture to sort of justify the invasion of India. They said, well, you had been invaded by our ancestral cousins back in the day, so we're just completing the cycle here. That's essentially what the idea was. And I'd recommend, if anyone wants to read a debunking of this theory, I'd just recommend reading Stephen Knapp's book, which is called The Final Nail in the Aryan Invasion Theory or something like that. Just research Stephen Knapp, Aryan Invasion Theory, Knapp. It's a short read, and it's a pretty handy read.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'll go ahead and touch on what I do know and what I mean. There's much more that I don't. I am particularly Sanskrit. I have no way or no possibility to possibly look at Sanskrit and study it and understand it. I was born and raised in the United States with like no exposure to Sanskrit. So in terms of like the evidences for or against the Aryan invasion theory, I'm very limited in being able to talk about it. What I do know is that the Western academia basically portrays as if it was an Aryan invasion. They're of the consensus, as a matter of fact. In the United States and Europe, they teach the Aryan invasion theory. And I know that India disputes that narrative to some degree. What I do say is the reason why I got into Hinduism wasn't because of wasn't because of these reasons. It was because of meditation, yoga, Advaita philosophy, yoga philosophy, the truth, basically. And so my embrace of Hinduism was the embrace of truth as I saw it. And so granted that when that happened, it was like, okay, now I have to deal with the caste system and this whole Aryan invasion theory, which I know nothing about. And does that even matter? So to me, it didn't matter because on one hand, if I was brought up as a white American, do I need to sit here and regret slavery and segregation for the rest of my life? And my answer was like, no. So my thing is, if the Aryans did invade, looking at the worst case scenario, that I don't have to feel guilty that these individuals who are able to articulate profound truths happen to have immoral issues 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. So that was the way that I handled the situation. Worst case scenario, if the Aryan invasion did happen, does it take away from the truth of yoga, meditation, oneness, and so on and so in the iconography and what Lord Shiva is to me and so on and so forth? And it didn't. Now, granted, what I have also looked at is that the Lord Shiva and yoga and Devi worship predates the Veda in India. And so there is evidence for that. And I know Sadhguru talks about that as well. And so the Dravidian people or the indigenous people to India already had Hinduism, from what I understand, prior to what we would call the Veda. Now, perhaps some people would argue that whatever predates the written Veda is Hinduism, right? So that there was the Veda and then it got inscribed. But that is not to say that these Aryans came in and that they didn't do that they didn't oppress the people as well. I don't know. They could have. And so, like I said, I haven't looked at and I'm not even capable of looking at some of the evidence for this, simply because I don't speak Sanskrit. The thing is, this issue doesn't matter to me as much as the truth matters. The truth of meditation, yoga, oneness, and that kind of thing. And so I'm willing to say that, okay, if the Aryans invaded, Sadhguru has said Aryans did an invasion. Jay Lakhani, when I talked to him, said, listen, we have to own up to these atrocities. And so even, I guess, within the Hindu community, there's a difference of opinion. I personally have no idea because I can't look at the original evidences.
Fair enough. I think someone in the comment section has said they have a video on this debunking the theory. If you go to the channel Beyond Atheism, they have a video debunking that theory. So I want to get on to a few more questions. How are you guys doing? How are you guys doing for time?
We're good. I got a good half an hour.
Good half an hour. Farhan as well.
Yeah, I got a good half hour.
Good stuff. So I'll try and get through as many questions as possible. So we've got a question on the relationship between India and Israel, and more in general, what does I suppose it's too vague, but what is India's position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And the second one is on the Sikhs and Khalistan. What is going on there? So if you want to answer first, someone more than welcome to jump in.
You can go ahead and take that one first if you'd like, Farhan.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to go, Sham. So say the question one more time, Veedu.
So if you could, if you know what is India's relationship with Israel. Speaking of Israel, the Prime Minister Netanyahu was with some Bollywood elite. So I know there was a picture floating around somewhere with Amitabh Bachchan and some other Bollywood actors, and there seems to be a sort of growing relationship between India and Israel, and someone's asking, what's going on there? What does India think of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? That's the first one, and the second one is about Sikhism and Khalistan, the sort of their own state.
Yeah, that's right. I do recall. Yeah, no, India and Israel has a great relationship, as it should. There's a lot to relate to. That's not to say that I'm over here now supporting Zionism and oppression of Palestinians, right? If there's atrocities against Palestinians from behalf of Zionist regimes, then that should be condemned as well. But that is not to neglect the fact that there isn't terrorism from the other side either. Right. So I think that there's other similarities in the sense that the Jewish nation it's an ethnic based country, right? And so some people take the word Hindu to mean across the board as an ethnicity as well. And so, for example, you would be considered Hindu in the sense that you have Hindu ancestry, or India. Hindu is equivalent to Indian rather than a religious label, if you will, or an identity. So the Taj Mahal, in theory, I guess, would be Hindu, right? From this perspective, I'm going back to that Nassim Mehdi debate. I'm sure you guys know which one I'm talking about. But so yeah, so the idea is that there's similarities there in the sense that that the Jewish nation is a very small nation. It's surrounded by Muslims and Arabs, and so there's a solidarity there in the sense that Judaism, goes back to the Jewish people, and it's an ethnic connection there, and so there's a philosophy of India, of the Hindus, if you will, and that is Hinduism. But Hindu does not necessarily mean that you follow those paths. It's simply a difference between ethnicity and the philosophies that emerged within that continent. So I think there's a similarity there. I know that historically, India has sent countless military people to go do yoga and meditation retreats to India. And so there's been a lot of Jewish people going to study the spirituality of India. So there's been a great relationship there. I know that there's many Jews that live in India. And so there's a great relationship there. And I think that that's a good thing. That's my perspective on India's relationship with Israel. And then the second question was about, the Khalistani thing. Yeah. I mean, I'm Punjabi. I love Sikhs. I love Guru Nanak Dev Ji. I think that they should be able to live it. They're one with us. There's no reason why they can't be proud of being Indian and why they need a separate state. It goes back to that whole divisiveness. You know what I mean? Why do we need to divide? Why do we need to separate the country? Why can't we all just get along and everybody still glorify whoever your guru or whatever your tradition is? You should be able to glorify it. And Hindus should support the glorification of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, which we do, and Guru Gobind Singh, and all of the things that they did for the country. I mean, there's no reason to separate and divide the country. There has to be a way forward where unity is the priority. That's the way I take it.
So let me start with the Khalistan issue as well. So in India, this was a serious issue in the 80s and a little bit of the 90s, but after that this issue has largely gone away from India. In India, an overwhelming majority of Sikhs are very proud to be Indian, very proud of their culture, very proud of their dharmic roots, their connection with Hinduism. You'll see whenever there's these things that people organize in Delhi. So I lived in Delhi for a long time. And there's these things they organize in Delhi called a Jagrata, where they set up a little tent and they place a statue of goddess Durga, and then they sing bhajans and stuff around it. And you'll see there as many Hindus as Sikhs. You'll see a bunch of Sikhs sitting there, praising Durga Mata and singing all those songs. In fact, there's plenty of very famous Sikh Jagrata singers who their profession is singing these songs. So in India, there is a lot more harmony between Sikhs and Hindus. And in India, you'll see, whether it's Sikhs or Hindus, they both very highly revere Guru Gobind Singh because they realize the sacrifice Guru Gobind Singh made. And what Guru Gobind Singh did was instrumental in saving Hindus in northwestern India. Most of northern India would have been Muslim if not for what the Sikhs were able to do during that time. So there is definitely an aspect of that. The Khalistani movement sort of even became a thing, till 1918, 1920, there used to be Hindu murtis in all the Sikh temples. And even in the Golden Temple in Amritsar, there used to be Hindu murtis there, and Sikhs and Hindus used to pray there together. But the British decided that it will be very handy to separate and drive a wedge between the Hindus and the Sikhs. So they kept goading the Sikhs that will give you control over your own temples, over your own gurdwaras, because they're your gurdwaras. They don't belong to the Hindus. So then in, I think, 21, the Shiromani Prabandhak Committee was established with the help of the British, where then the Sikhs gained control of all gurdwaras, and then they got rid of all the Hindu murtis from in there. And that's where a sort of divide started coming in. In India, that divide only exists politically. Culturally, that divide is very frail, and it barely exists. But then again, this Khalistani movement, and these things are very strong in Canada, in places like Canada, places like Britain, where a lot of Sikhs give these causes a lot of money. But again, when it comes to Indian Sikhs are very staunchly patriotic. So eventually, I see this problem going away as well, because Sikhs in India particularly are very aware of their dharmic roots and very proud of their dharmic roots, and hopefully that can transcend to Sikhs overseas as well. And when it comes to, I think the first question was about, I don't remember.
Israel,
yeah, Israel and India. So Israel and India, again, I agree with Farhan on a lot of things that he said, that there's a kinship among Hindus and Jews. The kinship that they are an ancient people against whom there has been a very deliberate and coherent campaign to wipe them out, and that they have suffered for a very long time under various people, and that finally, after for Hindus after 1,000 years, and for Jews after even longer, they've had a place they have a place which they can call their own, which they can truly belong to. And if there are Hindus overseas that are suffering, and there are Jews overseas that they are suffering, that they can be taken in and they can feel safe and secure in this land. And again, everything else I kind of agree with Farhan, that they're a country, there are people sort of surrounded by Muslims, usually a lot of hostile Muslims as well. So. And again, India is one of, I think, the few countries where Jews have not been systematically persecuted. India has been generally quite friendly with the Jews. So I think that sort of kinship exists, and that kinship and similar problems exists as well.
So I've got an interesting question here, just on that sort of Jews question. Someone is saying, would the guests consider the formation of Pakistan for Muslims and something similar to the formation of Israel for Jews? So post World War II, sort of a breakup of different countries or different land masses, and they both created around the same time. I think 1947. I think. So what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So I think it's a good question, but I think the question becomes more relevant when you ask another question as to, were the Muslims necessarily being prosecuted when they were part of India? Whereas, when the Jews, whenever they were, wherever they were in Europe, they were being, harassed and prosecuted quite heavily against. However, that was not the case with Muslims in India. Look at Muslims in India today. I think Muslims in India, I mean, there are arguments that can be made. Like, again, I'm not very aware of what life is like for an ordinary Muslim in Pakistan, but just by the looks of it and where India has been able to go and where Pakistan is today, you'd say that for a lot of Muslims, maybe not for everybody, but for a lot of Muslims, life is better in India than in Pakistan. Because so I think that argument can be made, and from that argument, I don't think they were being sort of mistreated or harassed or killed or anything like that. Hindus have always tried to maintain a good relationship with the Muslims, which is largely the case in India today. So if you ask that question, then I don't really know if that argument really applies. That because for Hindus and for Jews, there was serious persecution, murder, and all that stuff. But for Muslims in India, that wasn't really the case. So I think that's how I would answer it. I don't know what Farhan would say to it when he comes back.
Yeah, we can wait for him to come back, because I remember when I was in university and there was this Israel-Palestine debate going on. So I attended, and obviously there were different panelists.
Sure.
And one of the people on the pro-Israel side was Douglas Murray. Are you familiar with Douglas Murray?
Yes.
So he's obviously pro-Israeli, and obviously there were a lot of Muslims in the audience, and he was saying, how do you at the same time disagree with the idea of Israel yet support the idea of Pakistan?
Right.
So I was like, oh, this is interesting. How do I justify that? Because they created at the same time after World War II, the whole Middle East broke up, South Asia broke up. On one side, I'm saying, yeah, I'm Pakistani. On the other side, I'm saying, no, Israel. So I'll be honest with you, I had no sort of clear answer to that question. The only thing I would say is that perhaps historically, again, even I don't even know have even enough information to answer this question, to be honest, because I think it's a very interesting question. I
agree,
but I don't know if it's exact same parallel, because the Jews were all over the world, all over Europe, whereas Muslims have had a pretty rich, long history within South Asia for many hundreds of years. And I don't know if you could consider the Jews as invading armies within Middle East or Europe or whatever you want to call it.
Looking at sort of Judaic history as well, looking at the Bible, they have, since the very beginning of Judaism, they have a very strong connection with the land around Jerusalem, with the land that is today Israel. They've always had a very strong connection with that land. Same with Hindus. But when you look at Pakistanis, and when you look at Pakistanis as Muslims and Pakistanis as people of Islam, they don't really have that sort of a connection to the land that is Pakistan. You can make that case about Mecca and Medina for sure, but I don't know if you can make the same case about Pakistan. I don't know if you could make the same case about Chechnya, for example. So that's I think
it's probably more sort of a Pakistani Punjabi would be like, oh, my ancestors lived in Punjab as opposed to Pakistan, because I don't think a Punjabi cares about a Pathan or whatever you want to call it, Peshawar, whatever kind of region. Sorry, Farhan. So the question was regarding, could you compare Pakistan's creation similar to the creation of Israel, i.e., a homeland for the Jews in the Middle East and a homeland for the Muslims in South Asia? That was the sort of question.
Okay, and from what I gathered, from what I remember, because I was trying to have a phone conversation while he was giving his answer, was that the Israel was they were indigenous to that landmass where he's with the partition. You had Hindus leaving the area that is now known as Pakistan. You had Muslims that were living for years and years in India, traveling across to go to Pakistan and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of a difference there in the sense of how people were going to a land that they didn't live in and now they're going to live in. I think the similarity that you're citing is that there's a land for Jews So could there be a land for Muslims? My whole thing is the Jews were displaced and they had no ability to have any unity amongst themselves, which means that their civilization and their history would literally die if they weren't supported in some type of way in order to cultivate and protect and continue forward with their cultures and their traditions. With regards to Islam and needing Pakistan, I'm not sure. I always go back to the principle and the hope and the idea that people can live together, get along, get over their differences, and that sort of thing. That's what I always hope and strive for. And so rather than there being a separate Muslim country, I would hope that Hindus, Muslims, and everybody else is able to live together side by side in harmony and still be with their ability to have mutual respect and be different. If that were at all possible, I think that's the ideal scenario. Yep. But now it is what it is. Pakistan is where it's at in terms of what happened in 1947. There are more Muslims in India than the entire population of Pakistan. India will have the largest Muslim population in the world by 2050, surpassing Indonesia. So if hundreds of millions of Muslims are living in India now, peacefully, for the most part, I mean, we're not talking about Kashmir, we're talking about broader India. If they're able to do that in Hyderabad and other areas, then why do we need to divide and separate? I think when it comes to identity politics, when it comes to grouping with only your own group, that is something that has to die as people become friends, as people have kids with one another, and that sort of thing. I do know that the whole love jihad thing is good. Not even to get into that. Just
well, speaking of dividing, someone's asked me a question. What do you guys think of the Balochi separatist movements? And also someone's asked regarding these are all easy questions, by the way. There seems to be a lot of separatist kind of questions going on here, but it seems like everyone wants to get away from everyone else. And the other question was regarding I think the Yazidis. Just trying to find I saw this question come up quite a few times and I missed it. Here we are. What is your guys' view on the Yazidi Kurds? We were living peacefully next to the Muslims, and when ISIS came, all these Muslims became jihadists and tried to attack us. So let's go with the Balochis first, and then we can go with the Yazidis after.
I think the Balochi, I think the Baloch movement is more of a political movement than like a cultural / religious movement. It's more to do not with the Pakistani people or the Balochi people even that much. Now again, that's something I don't know. You probably know better than I do about the relationship between the Balochi people and the rest of the Pakistani people. But I think politically is what's been the problem, that Pakistan annexed what was then known as Kalat in, I think it was 1948 or something, and the Shah of Kalat was forced to sort of join up with Pakistan. And then since then, because Kalat, which is not obviously called Balochistan, is a very resource-rich region with a very relatively small population, it's been used. It's been used to sort of provide materials and resources for the rest of Pakistan, whereas the Balochi people have gotten a raw deal from it. So and when they've tried to rise up against it, they've been put down pretty strongly and pretty brutally by the Pakistani regime or the army, whichever you want to call it, which controls the Pakistani government. So that, I think, it's more of a political issue. I don't think it's as much of a cultural issue. So I mean, that's what I see of it. Now, I don't know if in the future something comes off it. Again, like I said, this kind of goes back to what Farhan was talking about when he was talking about the baby boomers dying off and the new generation coming in. When the new generation comes in and they see that, okay, we're now so heavily indebted to China thanks to the actions that our parents took, and that we've treated such a large number of people in our country the way that our parents did, things need to change. So something might change there. Now, I don't know what that change exactly will be. I don't know if that's going to be Balochistan becoming an independent country. I don't know if that's going to be the dissolution of like the state of Pakistan and South Asia becoming like a confederacy. I don't know what the future of that is, but that's just my understanding of the situation.
Mm-hmm. I would say that that this whole Balochistan separatism is Pakistan's karma for its separatism. That's as much as I'll say.
That's a good point, man. That's a good point.
But I'm always, yeah, as I say, in addition, I'm always for unity and harmony. People need to figure out a way to get along, transcend identity politics while still honoring and celebrating their own heritage. I think that that's possible. I think the future generations are going to be able to do that. I think right now, the world we're living in, we're not able to do that. Let's be clear about that.
Yep.
Where we're at right now, that's not happening. But I look for a future where that is possible, in terms of an idealistic, much more unification type of situation. And so that's as much as I'll say about the Balochistan.
And Waleed, I kind of wanted to ask you as well, mate. Like, what do you see in the future for the area in general, for South Asia in general, and for Pakistan in particular? You know, because again, you have more of a perspective on Pakistan and more of an experience of Pakistan, whatever little it is, than I do. So, what do you see as the future if you had to take a gander?
Well, I think the key word you said is little, because I do have a little experience. Obviously, I don't live there, but I've got family there. Most of my family is in Pakistan, but I would like to use what's his name? I can't. I forgot his name now. There's this guy, a Pakistani. I think he's outspoken sort of critic of.
Is he Tariq Fateh?
No,
Oh,
not
okay.
him. Someone else. I'm someone else. I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, he was saying, I think he was he criticizes a lot of the mullah sort of culture in Pakistan, which has been on the rise for many years now after Zia-ul-Haq, after the Wahhabization of Pakistan. You know, when I speak to people in Pakistan who of the older generation, they say that Pakistan, you know, back in the 70s was actually a nice place to live. There was Hindus, there was Christians, and there used to be like a wine shop. Things that are unimaginable now, but he said that this was the old Pakistan, and you know, the Imam used to be the guy who was actually the barber, but he used to read the prayers for, you know, for Friday. He used to read the prayers for the Friday Jummah prayer, whatever. But now the Imam, now the Mullah is someone else. He's a he's a big guy. He's got his own thing. He's got his own mosque, and this whole Mullah culture is growing in Pakistan. But at the same time, this guy, I really want to say his name because he really deserves the credit. I can't remember in which context he was asked this question, but he was asking about, you know, the next generation of Pakistanis, whatever it is, and they're Muslim or whatever it is. And he said, listen, we have lost our generation. And he wasn't saying it in a negative way or a positive. He's just saying as it is. The next generation of Pakistanis, they think Western, they dress Western, their TV shows are Western, their music is Western, their films, everything is Western, and yet you're saying they're Muslim. So from what I understand is that although on the surface Pakistan is a very religious or sort of socially conservative, religiously conservative country, the next generation of Muslims or the next young generation of Pakistanis, they're looking towards the West. They're not looking towards Mecca, Medina, or whatever you want to call it. And from when I speak to my cousins in Pakistan, whether they be the more liberal types in Karachi, these guys are just like me and you, man. They're not any different. And when I speak to the more socially conservative, my family in Pakistan, it was actually one of my cousins in Lahore who actually showed me this guy and said, look, this is what he's saying. And he was agreeing with him. But obviously, openly, you can't say that. And with the older generation, this man's opinions are sort of like he's the eccentric uncle. He's a bit of a wild card, whatever it is. But maybe under the surface, the younger people are looking at him saying, you know what, maybe he's talking some sense. So I think Pakistan is an interesting country just from that point of view. It's outwardly Muslim. It's denying its Indian heritage, at the same time it's looking towards the West, and they're steeped within their own tribal sort of I'm a Punjabi, I'm a Sindhi, I'm a this. So we were talking about this before, me and Sham. What is a Pakistani? And obviously most of my life I've been a Pakistani outside of Pakistan. This is why I know what, for me, Pakistan is Sharwal comedies on Eid, and when it's India and when it's India Pakistan match, then it's we have to support. That's about as far as my Pakistani experience goes, as you know, in the UK. And I'm not complaining. That's a fantastic thing. If only we won a few more finals, then it would be better. Other than that, you know, that's what it means. But when I go to Pakistan, it's Punjabi, it's whatever, it's separate. So when I was speaking to my other cousin in Karachi, saying that, you know, no one knows what a Pakistani is. This is a very relatively new thing. And maybe going back to the Israel thing, the Jews know who they are. They've known who they are for thousands of years. Pakistani is a very new identity. It's something 70 years old, and still we're not any clearer on what it means to be a Pakistani. If it just means to be a Muslim, but there are plenty of Muslim people around the world, plenty of Muslim countries, and a lot of people say that this was the first Muslim country, i.e., it wasn't based on ethnicity, and that's technically true. But what does that mean, though? I don't understand. Once you get over the okay, now we're a Muslim country, now what? Where do we go? And then, now what? And then we have this argument whether, well, it's a country for Muslims, but it's not a Muslim state. And people say, no, the whole point of having a Muslim state was that you run it by Sharia. And now we're getting into these arguments. And they're very fiercely contested. And then the whole Jinnah, I spoke about this on a previous live stream with Abdullah Gondal, who's another Pakistani ex-Muslim, and Haris Sultan as well, another Pakistani ex-Muslim. This is a lot of Pakistani ex-Muslims. But we were talking about it, and they were saying that even Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was a Shia Ismaili, so someone who is from a minority within a minority in Islam, he was a secular, British-raised Shia Ismaili who only spoke English. He didn't speak.
He was.
Right? He didn't speak Urdu. Yep. Would he be accepted in modern-day Pakistan?
That's a good question.
I don't know if he would be accepted. I also believe he drank alcohol. He's basically a white guy. I'm not saying that in a derogatory term.
No,
but he's basically a white guy who fought for a separate state for Muslims. Now he did his job and left, and now we're left with Pakistan. I don't have enough knowledge to answer that question, but I'm just sort of giving my.
Nehru was like the Indian version of Jinnah in India.
Pretty much.
They're both completely Western. Really didn't identify with the populations that they were supposedly representing, and so yeah, I mean,
so this is for me very interesting that even the Muslim guy and the Hindu guy that was fighting for India Pakistan, they were both basically British.
Yep,
pretty much.
So it's a British. Either way, the British have it. It's a British conspiracy. Either way, it doesn't matter which way you cut it.
I think you made a very interesting point, because you said, you know, the pieces are sort of there from what you're saying. You're saying it's a people that are nominally, they're Muslim, you know, but they have an Indian heritage that they don't want to accept. And then they also look towards the West in a sort of almost adultery sort of way, that they look at the West, but then they're like, oh, should I do it? It's nice.
They sort of look at it in a way like, don't covet your neighbor's wife. Like, you know,
it's kind of like that.
They enjoy it, but they're not. But they know, like, we know what we have here is technically meant to be better, but we know we want our neighbor's wife instead of our own. Right. It's a very crude way of saying it.
And so it's very interesting, right? No, you're right, and it's very interesting because it's like you said, you know, when you were talking about it, I was just looking at it and thinking the pieces are all there. You know, Pakistan and the Pakistani people could be a people. Now, again, the comment section is just going to be like, oh, bloody Indian telling us, you know, what we should be. But this is just, you know, just a suggestion. So I apologize. It seems like the Pakistani people can be a people that, you know, can be Muslims or eventually move away from Islam, whatever it is. But it is a people that if they realize and connect better with their sort of Indian ancestry and their Indian heritage, I think there's a lot that they can lead to, you know, better relations and better peace in Southern Asia in general. And then it's also a people that is a very modern people that, you know, looks at the West, adopts a lot of things from the West. So there is an identity that can be built there because the pieces are there. It's just that I think they're right now choosing to avoid taking those pieces seriously.
There's no glue. Like you were saying, the pieces are there, but there's no actual glue right now. Or if there is, I don't see it.
Well, the glue could be, you know, just them looking at it and being like, these are all things that are true. All we need to do is start to accept it and start to look at it seriously. That's something that maybe that is not happening right now, because it's all like, this is a country formed for Islam, for Muslims, and that's what it needs to be. Like I was talking about that chip on the shoulder, because this is something that Muslims back in the day really agitated for and then got. So for them to say that this, great paragon of Muslim existence or Islamic existence isn't all that it's cut out to be, it's a hard thing to swallow. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I want Farhan's perspective on this, but what you were saying earlier, just to, maybe this is a very small story, but I think it's true. If you ask a lot of Pakistani Muslims in this country, in the UK, and maybe even in Europe and US, Canada, that my friends, having said that, my best friends, or most of my closest friends, are Indian. That what I find is when you leave India, Pakistan, you go to your Indian friends or your Pakistani friends, all that kind of stuff, all that comes out, and it's like, like there's no hostility. Like when I go down to like some of the areas, and most of my friends are Indian, whatever. There's no. The thing is, we don't even talk about Pakistan, India.
Right.
That's like, it's not even a thing. Nevertheless, but yeah, when I was growing up, we watched Bollywood movies. We had Hindu friends. Like I saw them with the sari and the, all this kind of, and it wasn't a big deal. It's only after 9/11 and 7/7 where we had this new Muslim identity being pushed and created. Some of it was justified. Some of it I felt was engineered, and that's post 9/11, 7/7. I, for some reason, rightly or wrongly, said, I now identify with my Arab, Somalian, Moroccan, Indonesian brothers more than with the guys that I used to play cricket with and eat curry with. And for me, that was a small change, but has massive consequences. Like you were saying, I like other than Allahu Akbar, all that kind of stuff with Arabs. I don't speak their language. I don't know their culture. But with Indians, we can live together and like have kids together, and it'll be like no different.
It's so similar, yeah.
So that's one of the things, and this is also anecdotal, but not from my experience. But I'm a big fan of cricket, and whenever I watch interviews with sort of India and sort of Pakistani cricket players, every time the Pakistani goes to India, the amount of love they receive from the people, it literally, I think it was Shoaib Akhtar or Wasim Akram, he goes, I can't leave the hotel because everyone comes around me, can I have an autograph, can I have a picture, this, that. And I think Saurav Ganguly, who was the Indian captain, great player as well, and an amazing captain, he said that whenever I go to Pakistan, no shop allows me to pay for whatever I'm buying because you are our guest. We are not going to accept money from you. So the people, like, there is love. There is, and I'm not saying it in a wishy, hairy-fairy kind of way. Genuinely, there is love. There is love and admiration when the Pakistani cricketer goes to. I mean, Wasim Akram and Shoaib, they've got a lot of love and respect in Pakistan and in India. And when the Indian cricketers come here, they idolize Sachin. They idolize these guys. So the people, like you're saying, the pieces are there. The love is there. The history is there. Maybe the politics, these geo resources, politics, whatever you want to call it, has got in the way of realizing the bond between the common man. And that bond can be seen when the Indian and Pakistani leave India and Pakistan and go to America. You'll find that they're the best friends. That's what I found in my experience. Farhan, you can give us your say on the matter.
I mean, in terms of speaking from somebody who's born and raised in the United States of America, I have always felt that, whenever I met Indian people, we were chill and cool. And this was still when I was Muslim. We were, we were chill and cool. Nobody ever talked about India. I never watched cricket. Sorry, guys. I would. Y'all want to talk about LeBron James?
You're missing out on the 2020, man.
I have to question your identity now because you can't be proper Indian or Pakistani without.
What's going on, man?
Right. No, I was literally born. I don't even recall seeing a game of cricket I don't think I even saw a cricket bat. I don't even know what it's called. For the first 20 years of my life.
That to me says that you weren't beaten as a child.
With the cricket bat, right?
Yeah, of course.
No, I mean, literally, I grew up watching American football, American like quarterback, running back, wide receiver, basketball. So if you guys want to talk about LeBron James versus Stephen Curry and how the Warriors swept the Cavs, I could talk all that. But I have heard some of the names over the years of the cricket players on both teams. But yeah, in terms of having met Indian people, I mean, like, we never talked about religion. We never talked about politics. We just spoke. It was just socializing, right? Whether it was high school, whether it was college, it was just socializing, and everybody got along. And that's pretty much what it was.
Yeah. And so I just remembered another story. Sorry, I know that we were talking about fact, but I'll give another story. My cousin from Karachi, he's, you know, I think this was part of his university thing where he had to go to Punjab, Indian Punjab. He went to some places, or he went to like Lucknow, Agra, and maybe I can't remember which other city in India it was. Anyway, he's from a Pakistani university, so he's a Pakistani national, going from a Pakistani university to India. And when he went there, he goes, like, the amount of love I received, it's like I was some sort of celebrity. Like, he's just a normal guy, but the moment he said, "Oh, he's from Pakistan," "Oh, he's from Pakistan," and one guy, he was closing his restaurant down because it was at the end of the day, and you know, my cousin hadn't eaten. And it's a long day, and then he goes, you know, "Oh, can you open the restaurant?" He goes, "No, sorry, man, I'm about to close." And he goes, "Oh," and then one of his friends who was Indian, he says, "Oh, he's from Pakistan," and then he opened his restaurant off straight away, and you know, you up, hamare mehman hai, to ye hai, to wo hai, whatever. Mm-hmm. And he was saying he was chilling, like there was no like, "Oh, he's Pakistani, kill the guy," whatever it is. Like the amount of love.
But it's not just sports. It's the Bollywood. Like the Bollywood has plenty of, you know, Shah Rukh Khans and Amir Khans and Salman Khans and you know, Javed.
Tell me an actor that isn't a Khan, please.
Right.
Right. Javed Akhtar is practically an atheist, ex-Muslim.
Yeah.
He's straight up at it, and he's in India. Everybody loves and respects him. And Tariq Fatah, who came from Pakistan, India loves him. And so there's always room for people, so long as you respect the other people, right? As so far as you respect the country and the military and the Constitution and that sort of thing, right? But the moment you say forget all this, we're gonna, you know, what does that Maulvi from India, what's his name, Owaisi, rather than it being about, you know, empowering. Yeah, have you seen that before, Waleed?
I haven't seen it, but now I want to see it.
Okay. Check out that Owaisi guy, man.
क्या कुछ करेंगे और झंडा लेके जाएंगे मक्का और मदीना में. I mean, it's always gravitating towards, you know, the Middle East, and you know that brings back memories of the Mughals taking Indian resources and sending it to the Ottoman Empire, of sending it to Mecca and Medina. You know what I mean? Those that actually happened historically, and so. You know, I mean, there has to be some. Listen, I'm living in the United States of America. I'm going to be straightforward. I do not like Donald Trump. I hate Donald Trump, right? Straight up. But, and my hatred isn't vicious. It's more of an ideological thing. I have to love Trump.
I can't imagine Farhan hating. He just seems.
I know that. I've tried so much to try. I was like, man, he's going to help the economy. He's going to be good for business. I've tried and tried.
I mean, speaking of Donald Trump, wasn't there that whole thing like where he was speaking in Hindi? And
right.
It was terrible, but it was like, I was like, what is he saying? And I even had my Indian friend, I said, what the hell is he saying? And obviously they had to translate it. But, you know, apparently in America, the Hindus love Trump. So, you know.
I know. I don't know what's going on with that.
Come on, man.
I think it's the same thing. You know, I think it's the same thing because the reason they love him, and I think it's a lot of it is very misguided. But I think the reason they love him is, again, that same, they see this parallels. They see the way the radical Islamists hate Trump. They see the way the mainstream media hates Trump, and they see the way you know, people. The Trump talks about these people, you know, back. They see the way that he gives it right back to them, to the radical Islamists. The way he gives it right back to the mainstream media, and those are the two kinds of people that Hindus suffer at the hands of a lot. So there is those parallels. But again, the kinship that they feel with Donald Trump, I think, is misguided, because I don't think this is a reciprocal relationship.
Mm-hmm. It's the other thing is the whole nationalism thing, right? So you have the right wing folks in every country who are nationalists, who try to have some type of solidarity, because the left, and I'll say I'm more on the left than the right. I center left. You know, I value the right a lot, just like John Kasich, Narendra Modi, traditional values, all that kind of, I do value it, but I don't hesitate about saying that I'm on the left much more than I would ever be on the right. But I see the solidarity between nationalists. My only thing is great. Nationalism is fine, but then the fascism is what's dangerous. And there's a very thin line between the far right fascism and a basic nationalism and patriotism. And my thing is, a lot of this stuff creeps out when you see somebody like Donald Trump being supported by conservative, traditional, right-wing people of other countries. And so, I mean, it is what it is. You know what I mean? My biggest fear is the discrimination against minorities when it comes to the right-wing folks. Discrimination against minorities in every single country that these nationalists, supposedly support. Every single country, Great Britain, United States, India, far right fascists who discriminate against minorities is a dangerous thing, and it should be confronted. And it has the center right has to confront the far right in every country, as much as the center left has to confront the far left in every country. The whole Asifa case is a prime example of how people literally, one of the grossest atrocities is in your face, and you're not willing to stand with the nation as a nation and condemn the atrocity that happened to Asifa. And for those of you that don't know the case about Asifa, it was a child that was raped by Hindus, and this girl was a Muslim, and an uproar of political outrage. And my thing is, when the center right defends or pretends that the far right isn't discriminating against minorities, that is not helpful to the situation. As much as, like, I agree that the center left has to be able to get on the far left that often taints the perspective of us left-wingers as well.
I think what has happened there is, Farhan, as well, with the Asifa case, there's I would have to disagree with you a little bit, because there's a difference there. Because what's happened is, in the Asifa case, it's just the details of the case are very strange, because what's happened is two things. Number one is the police investigation that's been done by the crime branch of the Jammu and Kashmir police, which is the state where this happened. It's full of like gaping, glaring holes. So that's one of the things that people were protesting. And what is also the other thing that's happened is and again, I don't fault a lot of people for believing this, because literally every single large media house is publishing this. What they're saying is that people are out there supporting the rapists, or they're saying that they drop the investigation against the rapists. That's not what was happening in Jammu when people were protesting. What they said was, we want a CBI inquiry. We want a Central Bureau of Investigation inquiry. Because the reason we want a CBI inquiry is because the case that's happened, the crime branch investigation charge sheet has a lot of massive holes in it. They're saying people were here, but there's CCTV footage of people in a different state at the same date at the same time. So there's problems there. So that's why people were saying, we want a CBI inquiry, which is like the equivalent of having an FBI inquiry. So that's what people were asking for. So I feel like that's where the difference is. And I'm sure there are some people who are saying that the Hindus have done nothing wrong. But I think what the vast majority of people are saying that is, we don't want an end to the investigation. We just want a fair investigation, because there are serious problems with the current investigation.
I agree with you, Sham. And I think that the majority of people take that perspective, just like the vast majority of Indians can get along with anybody and want to respect everybody, just like the vast majority of Americans want to get along. And I think that that's fair. But there is always that element that we ignore, which actually doesn't care the fact that actually wants to defend the people who raped her. That there is that element within the fascist regimes of the BJP, and we can't pretend like they don't exist.
Sure.
Even if the majority of people who are calling for the CBI investigation were doing so for that reason, it doesn't take away the fact that there are people who blatantly wanted to defend the rapists. And so in that situation, that's what I'm saying, is that the center right needs to stand up against the far right. Just like Muslims need to stand up against terrorists, right? And everybody and ISIS, and this is what Sam
grooming
Harris
gangs as well. Like, would you say like grooming gangs in the UK is a similar sort of example?
Yep.
Or not?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it's a similar example. In the sense that I think the ordinary Hindu, like in India, should be speaking up against when the far right starts to go out of control, which I think so far they've been able to do a decent job of. So yeah, I think I'd agree, Waleed, that it's a similar example.
Sorry, was there anything else you wanted to say on that, Farhan? Because I don't actually know too much about this case, so I can't really comment.
I mean, I'm just saying that I'm careful not to defend the far left. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of bad things that can come out of the far left. Complete negligence and anarchy and chaos can come from the far left. And my thing is, I think that for those who are a little bit more centered in their approach, that we should be able to confront the other side and say, yes, they exist.
Sure.
They do exist, and we do not stand with that perspective or that approach.
I think there's a lot of sort of denialism on both sides when one of their own people ends up doing the crime or whatever it is. Oh no, it's not like that, or you're just being racist, or you're just doing this. And there's a lot of denialism, which is wrong, but unfortunately it's human nature, because we don't want to see one of our own be blamed for a crime, or whether it's a rape or a theft or whatever the situation is. But if we're going to live in the same land and we're going to live under the same law, then we're going to have to call each other out and keep, like both of you were saying, keep each other in check. And that's the best way to do it. I've got a question here, and I'm going to ask this question because they've started by saying "Bye John." So the question is, "Bye John, why do you think nationalism or patriotism is a bad thing?" I personally think it's stupid because I was just accidentally born in Pakistan, so I don't really care about being Paki. So the point is, if you're going to be like my country, then you have to, on some level, acknowledge that it's an accident of birth. So it's sort of a cautious patriotism. Would you agree with that, guys?
No, I mean, I think number one, we have to be careful of that inferiority complex that Brother Sham was talking about. We shouldn't hate ourselves, or we shouldn't have self-hatred or be ashamed of what we are. We should acknowledge what we are and where we come from, and what we've been through as a person, as an individual, as a family, as a generation, and as a historical civilization. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. In terms of patriotism, respecting the Constitution that gives us our freedoms, respecting the military that's protecting us, respecting the public sector that builds the roads and infrastructure in our country, that there has to be some degree of appreciation that this is a unit that is working together for the betterment of people that are that make up this country. So I mean, I don't know about the idea of saying that I'm not proud to be American. I'm proud to be an American. I'm not, Donald Trump's our president, but I'm proud to be an American. I love the United States of America, regardless of the fact of what happened to the Native Americans or the African slavery or segregation. Those are atrocities in the past of this country, but there's great and wonderful things that have come out of the American narrative as well. And same thing with Great Britain, same thing with India.
So could I ask you a more difficult question, which is, would you be proud to be, would you be proud of your country if your country was Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran?
I mean, I love Pakistan. I love Pakistan.
Mm.
I love Pakistani people, the culture, the food, in terms of interacting with people, that's awesome. But then again, like Brother Sham was saying, there's a government, there's an ideology, there's a religion that isn't something that I necessarily agree with. Like I said, I believe in the United States Constitution, but guess what? Slavery is still enshrined in the United States Constitution because they want to look at it like it's the Bible, exegetical hermeneutic, what they call it. They want to interpret it as the founding fathers did. So they keep the amendment enshrined and then add another amendment because they don't want to blaspheme the Constitution. Just the way it's just the same way with the Bible. We have to interpret it the way that the founding fathers interpreted it. Whereas liberals are like, let's have a more open interpretation of it, while still valuing.
Could we do that with Islam? There's like the slavery within America, in the Constitution, the slavery within Islam.
Right.
Could we say let's leave that there, but let's build upon it the same way the U.S. Constitution has there's no more slaves now in America. The same way Islam could rid itself of slavery theologically and practically by making a clear distinction now, saying we don't need this institution within our religion anymore.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that it would be a bigger statement to eliminate it, to be able to change the Constitution. But if, I also understand that we don't want to change history because, for example, I think one of the big things that came out if you guys remember the whole Confederate flag thing in the United States, where was that? Remember where there's that little parade or whatever, and then Trump was like, oh, they want to change American history and stuff like that. And then I remember Rajiv Malhotraji talking about, oh, if we want to take the Mughal statues down, you know what I mean? That whole situation. So do we want to change history, or what part of history do we want to celebrate and say, yes, we're proud of that? I think that's a national debate. I personally don't mind if it's there because it's there as history, so long as we understand what our values and principles are now.
So that's an interesting point, because we're having kind of the same debate in the UK with regards to Winston Churchill and other figures. So some people want to celebrate him, and some people don't know he, was someone who was racist or someone who was this. And then someone said, well, what about Gandhi? What he said about the South Africans? The more, all of our heroes have got dirt on them, apparently. So
100%.
So either we celebrate no one, or we celebrate everyone, and say and just take the good from what they did, and recognize that the bad did. I think there's a lot of good that Muhammad Ali did, but I also think there's a lot of bad he did as well. Same with Malcolm X, same with a lot of people.
Exactly.
But people only want to see them as an angel or a saint, and I don't like that, because you're almost sort of elevating them on the state of some sort of prophet or some sort of godlike figure, like literally floating like a butterfly.
Right.
But the fact is, he was a troubled man. He had many problems in his life. He did many good things, but I would say that a lot of things he did was very damaging, very damaging.
Andrew Jackson, he had slaves and stuff like that, but he accomplished things for the United States. I said that about the whole Aryan invasion thing. If that is the history, then do we just eliminate the entire Vedic knowledge that was valuable? It doesn't make sense to think that anything in the past or any individual in the past was perfect. And if the more we're able to let go and embrace the imperfections and value the good that came out, learn from the mistakes that happened, being more realistic about the past, I think the better that is for.
And at the same time, I'm not in favor of this revisionist history where you remove everything just because you don't like it, or you are on the wrong side of it. Like, for example, if you're a black person in America and you see a Confederate flag or a statue of someone that was a slave owner, recognize it for what it is. It's progress, the fact that you're a black American with the same rights as a white American, and you can look at it and say, I disagree with you. I don't like it. Right. And that goes across Muslim, Hindu, white, black, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Nothing's pure evil, or nothing was pure.
That's the point. Nothing is pure one thing, except Pakistan. That is 100% Paki, I'll tell you that much. But I was just joking, whatever. But I agree. There's this thing where we this sort of obsession with Puritanism or purity, like my ideology, my people are 100% X, or my heroes are 100% X, and your heroes are 100% evil, or whatever. It's not like that in history. There's always going to be yin and yang, and the old saying, as it goes. And we've got someone saying that Nawaz Sharif is 100% pure. He has no stains on his record. I think the Panama Papers would disagree with you, sir. But I think he's joking, whatever it is. So, guys, do you want to wrap it up? I know I've taken a lot of your time.
I gotta run real quick. I got a little thing going on at 2, but I've had a fantastic conversation, and
Absolutely.
I wish we could have talked for longer.
I feel like we need like a part 2 and 3 to this, like a proper Bollywood movie. This is like the intercession. This is the sort of the middle part of the Bollywood movie, and now we're gonna get into it.
100%.
Absolutely. So guys, I'll leave you guys with the final words. Sham, you can go first if you want.
Sure. Again, thanks, Walid, for having me on, mate. Like, it was a really fun conversation, and it's always fun to talk to somebody who's open-minded and who's willing to, open themselves to ideas that might be a little foreign to them. So that I've had a fantastic conversation. I've had a fantastic time talking to Farhan as well. So thanks for the chat. And again, I would like to see in the future is what I think Farhan alluded to really well. What I'd like to see a future where I think dogma doesn't have a hold on the South Asian people the way it does today, and that we can realize the natural kinship, because we have thousands of years of connection. That thousands of years of connection doesn't just go away in 60, 70 years. It's not going to go away. You'll have to wait another 10,000 years for that connection to go away. So I hope our people can, in the future realize the connection we have and move closer together, either as one nation or as a loose confederacy, the way the EU is, whatever it might be the case. But what I'd like to see in the future is a move away from dogma, and a move for our people to be closer together. So in the future, we can be one civilization again.
Agreed, and we will be. I think the future is all about unity, brother. Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Don't forget to say inshallah, because if you don't, it won't happen.
I know. That's why I made sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, Waleed. I mean, I think that we covered all of the major topics that we should have. You know what I mean? I think you did a solid job in doing the interview, and I think we covered all of the major issues. I mean, but in the future, I'm sure we'll link up again. It's great to meet you, Sham. I watched a few videos on your channel, and I was like, awesome. And and so I wish your YouTube channel success as well.
Yeah,
and Veedu, you have the best channel in my view. It's my favorite channel right here.
I'm truly humbled. I see Farhan as a sort of the elder in the community, the sort of guru, the voice of reason. So I'm doing Zakir Naik impressions and being an idiot, and then he comes along with a very calming influence. But yeah, no, I really respect both you, your work, and please check out Sham. The Sham Sharma show.
The Sham Sharma show.
The Sham Sharma show, guys. So I'll put the link to your YouTube channel in the description of this video, and I'll put a link to Farhan's as well. I would like to say, guys, I feel like I've gained a few IQ points. I know that's very rare for me nowadays, but I genuinely feel like I've got a bit more zen. I've got a bit more intelligence, and I want to say thank you to both you guys for having a riveting conversation. We've covered so many deep, controversial topics, and we've been very honest and open about our views, and I've really enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have as well. The people in the comment section, I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and thank you for tuning in. I would love to do this again, and I'd love to have both you guys on. I think you make a very good trio. For me, I saw it as I'm the Pakistani ex-Muslim, Farhan's the Pakistani ex-Muslim Hindu, and then Sham is the Indian Hindu. So he's like a sort of like a scale, like a spectrum.
Right.
We're all eventually going to become Sham, but that's the ideal goal.
Right.
So I would love to do part 2 in the future. I hope you guys are on it as well. Someone saying in the comment section, let's do a part 2. So let's do that. So guys, want to say thank you once again. It's been an absolute pleasure having you guys here, and I've really enjoyed it. And thank you to guys for the great questions. I think they were good. I think they were great. So guys, Assalamu alaikum, namaste, and sat sri akal to everyone out there. And I hope you guys are well, and I'll see you guys very soon.
Absolutely, brother. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.